Does it look like Gordon, only with too many wheels?
Came a voice. The group turned to see Edward, looking over towards them. The old engine had been quietly building up steam while they had been talking.
Yes, it did. I had to play the video back on my TV to see it better, but I did see more than 3 driving wheels on this engine,
the student said. Edward looked down at his buffers and sighed.
Oh dear. Seems they are still around,
he said.
They? Who are they?
James asked, curious what Edward meant.
Well, they, for lack of a better word, are known as the Kildane experiment. A tragic tale that took place long ago, and one that no one at the smelters dare speak of.
The group looked on as the old engine continued.
The Kildane experiment began in 1966. Following the second act of the Beeching Acts, many engines were withdrawn from service and scrapped before their time. Young engines sent to old sidings to rust away and be cut up. It happened so quickly, scrapyards on the other railway became filled to capacity. It was because of this that some trains of scrap came to Sodor for processing. This was before our line became a heritage railway. That summer, a young but eccentric engineer from Crovan's Gate came to the scrapyard looking for work. Following this young man's employment, strange things began happening. Workers would sometimes come to begin cutting up a scrap engine, only to find that someone had already started, as many parts were missing. Soon it wasn't just parts, as a whole scrap engine vanished once. For a time, no one could explain what was happening. It seemed as if the engine ceased to exist. Even receipts recording their arrival at the scrapyard would vanish. Police would occasionally patrol the scrapyard by night to keep watch for any break-ins, but none were reported. We were soon to find out what became of those parts. It was during one night when I just arrived with a delivery of petrol for the generators. We were just shunting them into their siding when suddenly there was a scream from one of the nearby sheds. The front doors flew open, and out came the young engineer, badly burnt. Before anyone could ask him what had happened, something big puffed out of the sheds in a cloud of steam. It was a monstrous-looking scrap engine. It had no face, just a rusty smokebox door. Its boiler and cab were from an A1, mounted crudely atop a 9F's chassis, pulling a rusty old tender behind it. Steam hissed and smoke billowed from its funnel and from its cab, which seemed to glow bright yellow. The hissing was pained, and at times it sounded like 3 engines puffing at once. The monstrous creation slowly puffed its way down the siding before coming to a stop on the points when its corroded suspension springs finally snapped. When the paramedics and the police arrived, they asked the engineer what he'd been doing. He said he was trying to create a new engine that could revitalize steam on the mainland. He'd gotten a hold of the engine parts from the ironworks, using the place as a part shop where he could scrounge up all the spare parts he could ever want. During his days off, he would sneak into the yard and steal more engine parts to complete his project. He managed to steal the complete scrap engine using a heavy hauler lorry owned by his brother, Frederick Packard, father to Jenny Packard, in fact. To hide his work, as he knew that all this scrap would be very valuable, he stole and altered receipts from the office to make it seem like no scrap engines had ever been delivered or engines arrived with fewer parts. He'd been in the process of test firing his creation when the water glass burst, spraying scalding steam and water all over him. His goals were terrible and foolish, and for his trouble he would endure many painful surgeries that would end up costing him the use of one of his hands and a lifetime of horrible scars. I sat nearby so I could provide my testimony. During this time, the scrap engine made many terrible noises as it cooled down. Sometimes it was a murmur, other times it sounded like screams. The screams of 3 voices calling out for their end to come. The mess of engine parts was soon dragged away and cut up. But it seems that isn't the end,
Edward said, pausing. The men and James stared in shock at the story so far, and while they didn't know what to say, they had a feeling they could tell what would be coming next. Edward then continued.
Well, Workers would say that they heard the sound of hissing and clanking around the yard during the night shift, like the sound of 3 engines puffing at once, but it wasn't just puffing sounds. Voices crying out for the end to return. That their rest had become disrupted. Voices would cry. It seems that engineer and using whole parts of deceased engines disrupted their rest, and now they roam the smelter's yard seeking for their end to come. But it never will.